my life become very important because Milton Erickson's work was, I think the man's a genius, and the things that he knew about the human mind, and the things that Bandler and Grinder and neurolinguistic programming knew about the human mind. And my master, who was a Tibetan master, actually knew hypnosis. He was a master hypnotist, and I studied directly with him. So I spent the next 10 years seriously studying context process, mind control, neurolinguistic programming, straight hypnosis, stage hypnosis, because I think stage hypnosis is fascinating, and I think these guys are geniuses.
Oh, I love stage hypnotists. I had a friend of mine that was a stage hypnotist, and he's like one of the most profound people, as an entertainer as well as a hypnotist. Yeah. It's mind-blowing to watch.
It is, and they really know the mind. They really know what's going on. So.
They do. So let's talk about your unique take on divination, because you have an out-of-the-box style, and you create a lot of your own spreads based on childhood stories.
Yeah. I think at one point I wanted to be a children's writer, and I do have another pen name that I've written a children's novel under. And when I was in grad school, I did some writing for a couple of New York publishers, and I did some children's writing, but I was always fascinated by children's books because there was something about fairy tales. I couldn't figure out what it was, but there was something about them that I thought was really, really significant. And I was faced with this weird thing when I walked away from teaching. And I was thinking that I might want to do psychic stuff professionally before that job just fell in my lap. I was meeting people who were telling me that I had to have a teacher, and they said you'll never be a professional if you don't have a teacher. You don't. And I was so sick of it. I had spent 10 years in academia, getting to the position where I really was hobbled. It took me another 10 years to get over everything I learned in all those years of college. I had to undo everything that I'd learned in school. So I was not in a place where I really wanted anyone teaching me anything or telling me anything at that point. And I said, no. I said, I know how to learn. And I had figured out a process for learning. I'm really big on processes. It's how I do everything. And if people understood that if you apply a process, you can solve all of the problems in your life. But people like to get hung up on feeling and emotion and indulging in those things. But I said, no, there was a process that I learned when I was teaching, when I was in grad school, about teaching people how to write. And I realized that I had learned how to develop processes. So I just studied my ass off. I read everything I could. I experimented every day. I mean, every day I just experimented. What is the morning? What is the afternoon? What is the evening? Then I'd look back on something and I'd look at that. And then I immediately started to develop my own spreads because I felt that the questions that people were asking were limiting, just like in school, just like in the religions. They were asking very limiting questions. And there were things that I wanted to know about myself, things I wanted to know about other people. And so I based the spreads on those questions that I had. And somewhere in all of that, I was reading fairy tales, and I got a hold of what I think was a really big influence was Dorothy Morrison's fairy tale deck. Her fairy tale tarot deck.
Yes.
And she made it for kids, and I thought that was cool. But I wanted a deep, profound understanding of the cards that I didn't have. I had a sort of superficial understanding, but I wanted a much deeper understanding. So I got that deck because I already had experience with all those tales. And I had, I was a literature professor, a writing professor. I knew how to break down a story. So I knew what was going on in those stories, and I instantly had a deep understanding of what each archetype was because of the story that she had chosen. And then there was another deck I got a hold of called the Sacred Rose, which was a very unusual approach. It wasn't so Rider Waite. It was a little bit different. And I was very taken with that particular one. And then what I started doing was I got a hold of every deck I could, and I started comparing and contrasting them all and seeing how people viewed things. And I developed this huge symbolic language based on all the comparison. And then I had I don't know how many decks at one time, but then I would, when I'd done with one and I'd learned what I could, I'd give it away, or or give it to a client, or I'd give it to someone, or I'd sell it. And then there were some that I stuck with that I really loved. But in the middle of it all, these fairy tales, there was something about them. I didn't know yet what it was. But later, when I met my Tibetan, my master, he taught me that the Tathagata, those who have gone beyond, the old Tibetan masters, that Lao Tzu talked about, that he had seen. Lao Tzu wasn't one of them, but he'd seen them, and Shangri-La and all of those masters who had been here, they concealed secrets for us in those stories. So we think it may be a European story or whatever, or King Arthur may be. They weren't. They were tribal stories that Grimm did. They didn't make those up. These are older. These are much older. So there's themes that are in them that were secrets that the Tathagata had left for us. And then another piece came into play when I learned how the structure of a fairy tale has an arc that mirrors the way the human mind goes through change, which is why there was one thing I could never understand in graduate school. They would give me Toni Morrison or these literary fiction, and it would just be so self-involved, and it would just go on and on and on. And you could read this thing, and everyone would be sitting around raving about, oh my God, this is such a great piece of art, a great piece of literature. And then you ask someone what actually happened in the story, they couldn't tell you. There was some feeling, emotion, whatever. But if you asked them what happened in a fairy tale, man, they could tell you the whole story. I wanted to know why. Well, in the end, it turned out that the structure of a fairy tale mirrors the way the human mind goes through change. So I always take that into consideration when I'm working with someone. If there's some story that can be shifted to in their life towards that structure, you can help them make the change all the quicker.
A lot of people don't realize and understand, and this is one of the reasons why I love you to death. Aside from thinking outside the box, there are so many profound hidden secrets that we have been pushed away from as we've grown up and been told to dismiss, that, that's not real, it's just a fiction. It's just, there's truth in all of these different stories. And thinking outside the box, and allowing our mind to expand beyond who we are currently now, and focusing on like the me, everything is the emotion, the feeling, your mind automatically processes, as being a hypnotist, even through little stories. If it's worded correctly and you understand the process that story takes, it has profound effects upon people. And I think with your readings and with the style that you take, I think it's phenomenal. I love looking at them, and I love watching your videos on them.
And there's a thing that I think that people miss is that what you said I would thoroughly agree with. There's great truth to it, and I always tell people, don't just take my word, experiment, go do it. And that's the thing. Well, the funny thing, the thing people have the most problem with is I tell them, well, don't take my word, go try it, because for some reason this approach causes a great deal of controversy with people, but to your point that it can create the story can create a change for good or bad.
Yes.
Which means that if there are people out there who are building stories, they are artists, they are religious people, they are business owners, they are marketers, They're in every area of our lives. They are building stories that reverse that process and create damage to our psyche. And you can, in 1 second, have a change that could damage you for a very long time just by something you've witnessed that was a story, because your mind doesn't know the difference between story and reality.
Correct.
So that when and that's why I always tell people go try it. Especially when they criticize, the way that I go about, well, you can't do that. I'm like, well, maybe you can't do that, but I just did it. It's like the big deal with Lenormand. I just don't get this. For one thing, I love the story. Okay, I love the story of Madame Lenormand. I love the story of her being Napoleon's psychic. I love the story, the legend of her telling him, "Don't leave Josephine. If you do, you'll lose everything." Because if that's true, then that tells me Josephine was the strategist, and he was getting it from her. But even if it wasn't true, and I don't know that I buy it, I think that what she got was tribal. This was a tribal method of reading, and it just so happens that particular one was recorded or left over or came with the legend of her. And these were tribal ways to read, because I know for a fact from my master that the archetypes, 78 archetypes that are from the tarot, were actually in Tibetan teachings thousands of years ago. They were on tiles. They were symbol on tiles, and there aren't just 78. There are more than 78.
It's like, the tea reading or the tea leaf images, the Lenormands, initially, they are nothing like what we read today. Back then, most people read regular decks of playing cards. Right. They may have scratched images on particular cards, which also stems from the tea leaf readings and from the actual tea leaf symbols, which dates back, ages. Wilma Berman is in our chat room at the moment. She wants to know about your thoughts on deja vu and dream reflection in readings.
My thoughts on deja vu and dream reflection in readings, meaning how do you interpret a deja vu or I'm going to say this. I'll say this about deja vu. I believe deja vu is a glitch in the matrix. I really do. I think it happens a couple of ways. I think sometimes we'll dream something before it happens, and then we'll forget we had the dream, and then we'll have the experience, and it's enough alike that we go, wait, I've had this before. But I also like that idea that was actually in the Matrix that this reality is not what we think it is, and that moment reveals something is not as fixed as we think it is, and it's a glitch in the Matrix, or it's something that's trying to tell us, look, this space that you're in is not what you think it is. Also, I would suggest that in Tibetan belief, there are different emanations of us, and there was a wonderful video on this. He was like 11 years old, this boy on YouTube, and he just explained this idea perfectly about multiple timelines. And the reason I think that is significant is I believe timelines are collapsing right now, and people are having a difficult time divining because they'll see something happen, and the timeline collapses and shifts, and now they have a different outcome than the timeline they were on. But I think that we might, if this is not getting too heady, I hope it's not getting too heady. I think that sometimes there may be multiple emanations of us that we are aware of at the same time that gives us deja vu as well.
I agree with that. I mean, I've had deja vu myself, and it's an odd experience. Going someplace, say, I've never been before, and the moment I step into that place, it's like I know I've been there. Mm-hmm. And in some way, shape, or form, I have. Whether it was in my dream or whether it is I'm going to be there, in another timeline, or, 5 years from now, something